Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s, and I interrupt our regularly scheduled video, which is supposed to be my 70s album collection part 3, to bring you a postscript on Beatles 64, the documentary that came out in late November 2024. One of the things that I like about having this channel is I get some very good feedback from my viewers, and in this case I was asking about where the origin of the idea that the JFK assassination was connected to the Beatles, where did that first appear in print? Because I couldn't find that, and somebody, sure enough, found it for me, and it had been around for decades, but it came out originally in 1975 in a Lester Bangs article for Creem, titled "Dandelions in Still Air, The Withering Away of the Beatles." Now, this article came out as kind of a response to the Beatles' solo careers, which in Bang's estimation was not very good, and I'll get into that in a moment. But then it went on to say some broader things about the 60s in general, which is where the JFK thing came in. Now, before I get to that, let me just give you some background on what Bangs was talking about with regard to the solo Beatles in 1975. So basically he said, the four splintered Beatles may well have weathered the pall and decay of the 70s the worst. So he comes right out of the gates swinging. And he even brought up the Elton John cover of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He says he called it shrewd in releasing a cover looking back bemusedly at Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So he's kind of poking fun at this whole idealistic period of the 60s that basically went to hell and everybody just ran for cover and every man for himself, basically. So here's what he said about the solo Beatles. Just a couple brief mentions here that I pulled out of the article. Paul McCartney: if he were just a little more gutsy, he might almost be Elton John. John Lennon: he'll do anything, reach for any cheap trick, jump on any bandwagon to make himself look like a significant artist. His marriage to Yoko Ono was culture climbing that revealed a severe and totally unexpected inferiority complex. George Harrison: his position seems to be, I'm pathetic, but I believe in Krishna, which he apparently believes absolves him of both from his blatant abdication of any position of leadership and its paradoxical twin, the total preachy arrogance toward his audience. And finally, Ringo is beneath contempt. He used to be lovable because he was inept and knew it, and turned the whole thing into a good-natured game. So that's kind of how he starts the article, by saying how a lot of the 60s icons have withered away and the Beatles are the worst of the lot. But then as he goes on, he turns more toward the whole idealism of the 60s, and he has a go at that. So there's a couple paragraphs here, 3 actually. I'm going to read them to you. And before I do that, let me have a sip. It's really interesting how this article morphed into what we know today and how the narrative has been formed today around this JFK-Beatles thing. Bangs says, I have this theory, which has got me into minor fracases on a couple of occasions, that the Beatles' initial explosion was intimately tied up with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. In fact, I've been known to say that JFK's killing was a good thing, historically speaking. A man died in an ugly fashion. He happened to be a man that the people who didn't know anything about corporate politics considered to be the leader of the free world, and it was a national tragedy, etc. But on another level, it was good because it opened up a lot of things. When Kennedy was in office, we were living in a national dream world, a new frontier as panacea, the illusion of unity. Underneath it all, it was as shitty as it ever had been, but patriotism in those days seemed viable, even for many of the avant-deviant opposition fringes of our society. That misconception was shattered with the president's skull. The dream was over, and we were left with fragmentation, disillusionment, cynicism, and hostile factions. All of which is fine. People began to look inside themselves instead of toward a pop star of a president for the definition of America. Out of this forcible introspection erupted the new left, acid, all those alternative lifestyles which by now have, of course, become even more oppressive and delusory themselves than the Kennedy era. So in that sense, it was healthy for that body politic that we lost that particular leader. It forced us to contemplate a whole new set of options. Wow. Yeah, this guy's got some resentment, doesn't he? So he finishes up by saying, It also left us with a gnawing void which forced us to find new leaders, a new kind or any kind at all, and fast. Thus, the Beatles, exploring across America from Ed Sullivan's stage in several different record companies, just weeks after the shot was fired. They were the perfect medicine, a sigh of relief at their cheeky charm, and a welcome frenzy to obliterate the grief with a tidal wave of fun for its own sake, which ultimately was to translate into a whole new hedonistic dialect. So that is the original seed of the JFK and Beatle connection. It's from this article, and Bangs really goes hard at this whole 60s idealism that by 1975, had withered and died and, turned into something completely different, basically. It all died. And this is very satirical, though, not just resentful, but there's satire in here as well. So to take this in its original form is such a different meaning than what we know of that narrative to be today. And I thought this was interesting. I thought, well, let me read some of this for you. It's from 1975. I don't have the whole article that I can link to, unfortunately. I just had a couple very bad scans of the article that I was able to transcribe myself. But it is in a book. There's a book on Lester Bangs that's available to buy. So it's reprinted there as well. So anyway, I thought that was worth coming back and doing a little update on this video, because I think that's an important way to show how things like this, ideas get transformed over years into this fantasy, this fantastic story and romanticizing of history. And there's a lot of people that would rather have their history given to them straight. And where the Beatles are concerned, there's a growing number of people, myself included, that prefer the Beatles given to us straight. And all that other fantasy stuff I just soon do without. And the problem is the fantasy is becoming fact in quotations. And that's what I object to. So I thought it would be interesting to hear what Lester Bangs had to say. Bangs was actually once called rock's greatest critic. And that was by another critic, Jim DeRogatis. So like him or not, a lot of those 70s critics were very harsh. And a lot of people today, if any of those critics negatively critique an album that they like, they typically hate that critic. But really, most of these critics, it'll be 50-50 down the middle. Stuff you agree with them, stuff you don't. And the bigger thing is how well they write and what context it's taken in its day. That's really important to understand that. So that's always how I approach a lot of these reviews. And the reviews of that time, some of them were very biting. And by the way, Lester Bangs did get himself fired from Rolling Stone magazine, along with Jim DeRogatis as well. So that should give you some kind of a feel that they were probably on the right track with a lot of the reviews, because after a while, Rolling Stone magazine was a little bit allergic to the truth. So just a little aside there. Now, other comments about the documentary, the Elaine Kim song, All My Loving. I didn't know who Elaine Kim was. And she basically is a YouTube artist. She's not a recording star, but she did this very nice rendition of All My Loving. And they used that slow maudlin song and rendition of it to help emphasize the sadness that, as to quote Paul McCartney, America was in mourning. So they used something like that to set the stage, which I thought was a little overdramatic, rather than using the Beatles version of the song. So that was a little bit of, I thought that was worth mentioning. Other people brought that up. And another thing that I forgot to mention that I should have probably mentioned was the Smokey Robinson interview, which, he talked about being in England and seeing the Beatles at the Cavern before they were the Beatles. And we come to find out that really Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, weren't there in England until 1965. So some commenters kind of went at me for that and said, well, you can't assume that Smokey hadn't been there earlier. I said, well, he said him in the Miracles, so I'm taking him at his word. And let's say Robinson got the memories wrong or got the dates mixed up or whatever. That's understandable because he's in his 80s. What's not forgivable is the fact that the documentarian chose to use that when just about everybody watching it, any Beatle fan watching that interview knew that was wrong. So if I'm making that documentary and Smokey gets that wrong, like, we can't use that. It's too wrong. You know, I mean, he's a sweet guy saying it, but why would you use that? That just underlines how slipshod this documentary was. And I'll close by saying that the idea, oh, by the way, before I forget, the person that brought the Lester Bangs article to my attention was Andrew McDonald. Thank you, Andrew. You gave me just what I asked for. What I wanted to close with by saying that Apple Records, and I've been very critical of them for what they've been putting out lately, and they don't seem to understand the subject matter, being the Beatles, and how to curate their legacy through merchandise. And I don't mind that they're trying to make money. That's what they're supposed to do. Imagine Apple. I don't know how many people are involved in that company. You've got the four principals: Lennon and Harrison's estate, McCartney and Starr. And by the way, there are McCartney haters out there that I get in my comments that suggest that it's all Paul making all these decisions. That's not how this company is set up. That's not possible. There are four separate owners, and they all have equal say. What's going to happen after Paul and Ringo are gone? I don't know. But I think that Apple is doing what they can do to keep the money flowing. I mean, there's mouths to feed. You can imagine some of the salaries of some of these people. But I just don't think, time is running out. You know, all of these old pop stars eventually go by the wayside, and there's nobody left to really buy their stuff. And a lot of people also came at me for my review about Beatles 64, and they were saying, well, this is not aimed at you boomers and all that. It's aimed at a new audience. I'm like, is it really? How do they think that these old geezers they pulled out of the mothballs for their interviews are going to bring in any new people? It makes no sense at all. And plus, it was shittily done. That's going to draw new people? Well, maybe new people have lower expectations. Younger people that are used to TikTok or whatever. I think that's an argument you could make, but really, is that the argument Apple would make? Probably not. So Apple's in a tough spot here. They're trying to make money. They're trying to put out good stuff out there for us. And, you know, they've got a couple things right, but they've got more things wrong than right. So what can we expect in 2025? I guess we're going to get the 60th anniversary of Rubber Soul. Who knows? Maybe they'll wait till the 70th and give us the 60th anniversary of Help. Who knows? But I mean, it's getting to be kind of silly now. And as we're aging out of buying this stuff, even myself, I'm not even a boomer, but I'm kind of getting past buying some of this stuff. I'm being very selective, and my shelves just can't handle the load anymore, if you catch my meaning. So I think the next couple of years will be very telling to see how Apple does this, and if they're going to try to do. I think the Queen biopic is influencing them to do these other biopics. That might make them some money. I don't know that that'll be a good way to enhance the Beatles' history, but I could be wrong. Been wrong before, I'll be wrong again. Hopefully not in the next video, which will be my 70s album Part 3 collection. So you'll want to tune in here on Pop Goes the 60s.